Very cool. Welcome everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this interview. Today I have with me the infamous Aleks. And today we're going to be talking about a very interesting topic, which is architecture, software architecture, the role of an architect, right?
Yes.
And the reason we're sitting here today is because there has been a large demand within the SciTech community, mostly developers interested in the role, knowing more about the role, I guess. And given that you're one of the, let's say, the pioneers within the community to have reached that role, would like to hear more about your experience. Any tips and advice for the aspiring consultants that we have within SciTech. So welcome, Aleks.
Thank you
again.
Thank you. And for the audience, trigger warning. Buckle yourself because I will be saying a lot of very provocative things. I hope you're going to enjoy the conversation. A lot.
Looking forward to it as well. Nice. Yeah. So let's start from the beginning. I know you, but maybe for the audience who doesn't, can you give us a quick synopsis into the life of Aleks?
Yeah. Well, I say that I am 21 years old with 23 years of experience, and this 23 years of experience started in 1999, actually in Eastern Europe, where I started working for the software outsourcing company. And a lot of what I'm going to say actually is what I learned in the trenches of being kind of outsourcing. Essentially, I went into being developer out of necessity. I was in the college, I liked computers, and I needed money. Very easy. And then I had pretty hard life, as I would describe it, because I would do different jobs that at the time didn't seem to do anything with just programming at all. I was asked to do tenders. I was asked to do presentations. I was asked to do budget calculations. And I was asked to talk to customers. I was asked to kind of figure out what has to be done on the particular project. And in the early days of my career, I actually hated it because my peers, they would get a ticket and they would happily do it and go to have a beer on Friday. And I was just, scratching my head.
Yeah. And
only years later, I have realized that actually I was very fortunate because I have built the experience across, let's say, the complete chain, how it happens. And what makes me unique is that I have sat on both sides of the table, from the customer side, who says, okay, I want to buy a piece of software, also to the provider side, who says, okay, I can build a software for you. So I know how this end-to-end fits. And that requires a lot of unique life experience. And being a good developer is part of it, yes.
Definitely. Yeah. So these early, I guess the position where you're at right now has been in the making for years.
Yes.
And you started doing all different tasks.
Yeah.
And then I guess at the time, were you also doing development work as well?
Yes.
Okay, interesting. So I guess you're the right person to talk to because you went through that evolution.
Yeah.
How long have you been with us here at SciTech?
That's about 6-7 years.
6-7 years.
Yeah.
And you tell us a little bit more about the projects that you've been, involved in, and what capacity.
Well, the capacity as a title is all over the place. I started with tech lead, then it was changed to delivery lead. Then I went to 2 gigs who had a title of solutions architect, and if I look right now in my current profile with the client, it says I am infrastructure engineer level 3, whatever that means. So which kind of means that the architect, being the architect and having a title of architect have nothing to do with each other. It's architect describes the person, and a position describes the position.
Definitely. No, I get it. Yeah, one of the projects I was into, or I was dispatched to, it was everybody has the title of DevOps engineer.
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally get it. Let's go back to the topic of architecture.
Yeah.
Can you tell us how you slided into this role?
Actually, I was pushed by the circumstances, and I would say that I do not remember. I was just solving different problems all over the place, until one day people simply started referring to me as an architect. For me, it was a surprise. In the early days, I thought that you should know more about programming languages. You should know the libraries by heart, and this is what makes you architect. But obviously, those people, they were still described as developers, and I was described as an architect. So to me, it was like, oh, okay, there's a bit of a kind of shock there, until I actually realized what is the purpose of the architect and what is the purpose of the architecture, and it made total sense.
Okay. Let's dig deep into that point. So what is so far we've been talking about the things that it's not. It's not about development. It's not about the programming languages. It's not about how good you are at coding. And so what is it actually about? Like what kind of skills?
Excellent. This is an excellent question. If we take a step back, and I will ask you, okay, what does the architect do on a daily basis? What would you think about architect? So let's say, what does the job of architect? What is he doing? What is he producing?
He is producing. I mean, if I was to guess, and I didn't know anything, I would say that planning. Overall high level solutions, what I would say. Also, the word architect comes from other disciplines, not just software engineering, and usually has something to do with planning, with blueprints, but nothing to do like with getting actually into the so that would be an educated guess into what the role is. But I'm more curious about your perspective.
Well, I'm actually very intrigued to hear your opinion. I will ask you a trigger question. Can you describe what architecture is in present-day software?
Very interesting question.
Well, I can tell you 99 out of 100 people would not be able to describe. Let me read for you the job description. It's from a real one. But copy-pasted, it would apply to probably 99% of architect posters out there. So it has 4 bullet points. The first one says, designing the solution architecture of the new applications and large changes. Okay. Being responsible for developing vision, strategy, and roadmap for the DevOps teams. That's roughly what you refer to. Motivating DevOps teams in creating an engineering culture. Okay. Stimulation DevOps teams in migration to cloud solutions, automation being twice as fast and always on.
Very specific, this last one.
Okay, now this actually a very interesting question. Is this specific? I can tell you, no it isn't. It's clear as mud. Because it can mean anything to anybody. All right? And if you get people going into this and starting saying, okay, so what on earth I'm supposed to do? You see people trying to do everything all over the place. Okay, understandable. And these questions of what is actually architecture comes in frequently and periodically, especially in these days of DevOps teams, self-organizing teams, and blah blah blah, and the teams who need to make their own decisions. And then there's another interesting question. So we kind of have a fluffy definition of architecture, but if we have a team which is autonomous, why do they need an architect?
It's very frequent that it's the case. That's a very good question.
That's a very good question. I can actually answer what the architecture is and where it comes from, but then the answer will be a bit of on the long side. In our professional, architects used to mean awful amount of sense in the times before Google, because I'm old enough to remember it. Let's imagine that you remove Google from your life. There's no ChatGPT. okay? And you have a manual on paper,
Mm-hmm.
and you need to do something.
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing that you're left to do is just literally go through the manual page by page. And in those times, there were people who actually knew the domain, they knew the technology sufficiently enough to tell you, okay, it's on page 375.
Mm.
So that made awful amount of sense. That kind of role doesn't make sense much in the times of cloud computing and agile teams. However, architecture, according to Aleks, and this is a trigger warning, is simply the sum of all decisions that are made, which are either impossible or very expensive to change.
Mm.
Which also brings to...
Oh, so slow down. So it's
Yeah.
the sum, let me say it, the sum of decisions
Yes,
that are difficult or impossible to make,
to change.
to change.
Yes,
Okay, go on.
right. And if you embrace this definition,
Yeah.
what is architecture, then you can also define very easily who is architect. It's very simply put, it's a person who makes decisions whose consequences are either impossible or very expensive to change.
Mm.
It's all about the costs.
Mm. Let's stay on this point for a little bit, and can we take on some examples, for example,
Yeah.
just to make it clear?
Yes. For example, you want to embark on building your solution, and you need to choose between Azure or AWS.
Mm-hmm.
3 years into this journey, it will be very expensive to, let's say, to do the migration back.
Mm-hmm.
This is an example of an architectural decision. So
Mhm.
you made an architectural decision,
Definitely.
for example, to stick on AWS because, and the because part, this is what architect is producing. Yeah, that's quite easy as that. So
Yeah.
I believe that in a modern world, there is always a need of people who see landscape from the business perspective on a high level, and they identify key decisions that need to be made in order to deliver business benefits.
Mm-hmm.
Which, by the way, also describes the difference between who is bad architect and who is good architect.
Oh.
Yes. Actually, anybody can make decisions. You can be architect tomorrow, literally. There is nothing in the way to stop you from being one. What separates bad architect from good architect is that good architect make decisions so that the company has a positive financial profit
Mm-hmm.
out of these decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And
Eventually.
Eventually, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And if the profits or the benefits are not realized, then the architect was no good.
Mm-hmm.
Very simple.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, it makes sense. So it is like you mentioned, just for the audience to so we can stay on point. And there's a lot of interest on this. It's a very interesting topic, and it's
Yeah.
really for me interesting to hear your perspective about it. And let's go back to your definition and
Mhm.
take it from there, right?
Mhm.
So we talked about many things. We said that the person who is in the architect role
yeah,
is faced with situations
yeah,
that needs to be resolved within a business context,
yes.
and the person has to make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And based on these decisions, like the outcome will determine whether they're good or bad architect.
Yeah.
There's also the good or bad architect on the day-to-day
Mhm.
of the job, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what is, according to Aleks, according to you, what is a good difference between a good architect and a bad architect?
Well,
Besides let's put the outcome,
Mm.
because the outcome could be 3, 4, 5, even longer years from now.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, the good architect is somebody who listens to the inputs.
Mm.
Because to get the important decisions, and actually the reason why you're hired is you can get the important decisions right every single time.
Mm.
It is different from being right. And you cannot, or actually you always have to think that you can err as yourself.
Mm-hmm.
you're the human. Your judgment can have lapses. You can forget things. You can get emotional. So a good architect is mainly capable of taking the input from others and digesting it and kind of presenting a next advancement in understanding of the problem or how the solution that kind of currently is emergent actually fits into the problem. This is something that I find typically not being present in, let's say, not so good architects who say, well, okay, I'm the ultimate authority, and therefore I will dictate this to that things are done in a specific way. Of course, there are situations in the business where you have to dictate. And I can give you an example again. If you are running something that has a legal side to it, let's say you run an operation for which the company has made a contract, and you need to do a few things, and you need to generate blah 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 blah. There is no room for discussions. You are there to enforce that the things are made to the letter, regardless of what people think. Those are legal things. There are compliance things that have to be done in a specific way. There are security things that have done to be specific ways. But we're probably talking about, in a healthy, let's say, cooperation, probably 10%, this is where you really have to insist. For 90% of the rest, you can find multiple alternatives. And the good architect would be able to define the architecture guardrails for, let's say, for the Agile team. Of course, that would be the next question. So, if what exactly is architectural guardrail? So, this is very simple: a requirement paired with the explanation what is the need and the trade-off of it. For example, if I would say that you can do whatever you want as long as, let's say, landing page opens up within 1.5 seconds, because, and then I will fill in things. And then you say, okay, look guys, we have this and this and this. We have probably kind of, typically it runs about a handful of such statements. And you need to find anything, let's say within, within the reason that kind of is a satisfactory construction to these requirements. That's it.
Yeah, definitely.
And essentially, that's why you are there. If you are involved in a situation where you have multiple teams, then you play more sort of cross-pollination role. You become aware what teams are working on, and you help other teams not to work on things which have already been invented. Or you will come to the team and say, hey guys, you want to do X, Y, Z, that can be done, but in our company we prefer to do this, or it's company policy to do X, Y, Z. This is kind of roughly what kind of influence you need to exert. However, that is all becoming secondary to understanding of the problem. So what is the problem that you're actually trying to solve? It has nothing to do with tech, or it has very little to do with tech. Well, of course, there are always exceptions. Running anything in the cloud does have a cost. And sometimes you're also forced to balance agility versus infrastructure versus people available, etc., etc. So you don't have the ideal solution anyway. It doesn't exist. You need to settle on something. Making trade-offs.
Definitely.
That's what's your role.
So a big part of it is making trade-offs. And that's something that I guess would become. I think that's the thing that stands in the way of a lot of people becoming successful at this role, even if they want to, because making a trade-off, I guess, in my view, sometimes pushes you to make quick decisions versus trying to be perfectionist on something.
Exactly.
within time constraints and business constraints and other things. So that's definitely what you mentioned about learning this as a skill of decision making, and also, like you said, listening to the input. Again, but these are things that, like you mentioned, it's outside of tech. Like it's more like personal skills, because, for example, in order to get this high level overview of all the teams that you need to sit down with people, have conversations. What are some of your tips, like advice that you from your experience, for example, that you would give to aspiring people, mostly developers?
Yeah. You see, the very first skill that you need to develop, it's, in my opinion, it's make or break skill. You need to be able to think in product terms. What is called product thinking.
Product thinking.
Product thinking. And this is what I see frequently from the field. Present day, let's say, your average, Agile team, it doesn't possess it. Again, another trigger warning. What is a user story? If you will ask this question, a regular developer, so what is a user story? How would you describe it? Wow.
It's and you're saying this is something that is not clear to most people. Wow.
If you ask most developers, they will not. Actually, according to the foundations of Agile, it has an explanation in one sentence. You ask most developers, and they will say, So, user story is simply a reminder to have a conversation.
A reminder to have a conversation.
Reminder to have a conversation with the user. So if you will kind of go back to what Ken Beck was explaining, they did not have time to write proper documentation. It was 80s. And we did things quite differently in that time.
Okay.
And what they said, instead of writing documentations, they would go and talk to users about their kind of emergent needs, and from that they would create sort of tickets, and they would do it. Unfortunately, present day working of a typical team, they concentrate on tickets. So they can tell you what they are doing, and they are unable to do what is done. You can easily probe it. You can pick up random ticket and say, what will happen if this is not done at all? And you will see how people are unable to say what are the ramifications of things not done, or things breaking, or things been late. This is the indication of lacking product thinking within the team itself. Because product thinking is you begin with the value to the client. You are able to articulate it. What's the value to the client? Let me give you an example.
Yes, please.
I'm right now doing the infrastructure update, and for a major airline. And I got a requirement, very vague. We want to make an automatic failover in case something breaks. What can you do with it? Anything? Not much. You need to dig deeper to ask yourself, okay, so why would you want to do it? And I say, okay, look, we have the infrastructure component. If it fails, it will cost company 30,000 per minute. So we don't want to waste 15 to 20 minutes until people realize that in calling each other, so a lot of money will be wasted. Understandable. So we have a value, right? So we want to prevent a loss of money. Next one is, okay, so we have a catastrophic event leading to loss of money. How can we detect a catastrophic event? How can we do it positively? Which data do we need? So you keep going deeper until you have a clear definition to say, okay, I want to have a component which will perform failover in the event when, and then you can list condition and say, okay, I will do this component, I will place them here for these reasons. This is how we will shape the communications from the infrastructure components to this, because I want very short time. Now, this, what I'm showing to you, it becomes an architectural decision. You say, I want short time. I want to remove everything which does not make the signal go faster. Kind of this kind of thinking kind of doesn't exist very frequently within.
So you get
teams.
the high level requirement, which
Yeah.
is in some cases, and it's vague. So
Yeah.
you need to do some analysis. But then as an architect, you need to make some decisions, right?
Yeah.
So you need to say, okay, maybe if you go back
Yeah.
to the example that you mentioned,
Yeah.
the in the case of this component fails,
Yeah.
then it costs us like 30 grand per
Yeah.
minute, whatever.
Yeah.
Then it's up to you to decide, okay, I'm gonna fix the root cause of this,
Yeah.
or I'm just gonna put a band-aid fix on it,
Yeah.
and then it's gonna reduce
Yeah.
the 30,000 to 10,000 or whatever.
Yeah.
So these are decisions that you need to make.
Correct.
But then now, this is what like, okay, so this is like your like say the goal. You
Yeah.
determine the goal,
Yeah.
but then you have your interaction as an architect with the Agile team, right? So would you say, what would be the ideal way of interacting with the Agile team? Because right now, I understand, for example, that developers lack this deep product thinking, like you mentioned, but it also comes to the fact that like the team has knowledge spread between product owner,
Yeah.
and so which it loses like that ownership of
Yeah.
the product, right?
Yeah, correct.
So what would you recommend, like the best way to have that conversation with the Agile team?
This is a very interesting question, and it does not have a universal answer.
Absolutely not.
Because it is
Ideally, in an ideal world,
actually, ideal world also doesn't exist, because look, to provide any type of a solution, then you need to first agree that you have a problem, and you need to agree what the problem exists. Actually, to my opinion, traditional solution architecture actually does not have a place in. That will be a little bit too much, but let me finish this thought.
Sure.
It does not have a place in setups where you work with agile teams or with autonomous teams. You don't need an external architect.
How come?
That's the whole thing. You don't need an external architect. That's the idea that if the team makes the decision themselves, then they should have everything already to make these important decisions. Because remember, my definition is that architecture is sum of decisions which are hard to make. So if you have somebody external who comes periodically, you will miss the moments when important decisions are made.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
And it becomes counterproductive to have this type of relationship. Actually, from my experiences with other customers, whenever they say, okay, I have let's say a team which has done the design, and then we will go for the approval. There are always frictions because the product has been, let's say, in development for a year. They go to the architect, and the architect says, look, you are not compliant with XYZ.
Very frequently the case.
Very frequently the case.
Yeah.
And kind of, if you have these type of interactions, it is impossible to remove it. Completely impossible. So I think that a typical solution architect actually doesn't have a role. So that competence has to be in. But what I do have, I would go a step back and say, hey, we have as an industry such a high growth of people who enter that there is a shortage of skills. There is a half-brother of architect, if you ask my opinion, it's called engineering manager. So engineering manager is actually, this is the best alternative to architecture in most, to the classical architect in most setups. What does this person do actually? So he is actually looking after HR, so he is looking after the growth. So he is actually in best positions to mentor the team to acquire the skills so that they make the right decisions themselves. That makes much more sense in what I have seen. There is also a separate role, but then it's only meaningful on an enterprise scale or on the domain scale, where you look after the domain.
Definitely.
So when you have, okay, I have a very complex business. I have 50 systems, and going back to what I was mentioning in the early days, there are relatively few people who know it because each organization is unique. There's no documentation anywhere in the world how this particular place is put together.
Yeah.
It's only with these people, only they can explain to you why things are this way and what would be the best steps how to fit this requirement.
Sure.
They exist on a very high level. They are more on the, let's say, business side. They think about capabilities and they think about high level use cases rather than actual technicalities. So on that level,
it does make sense.
It does make sense.
Yeah.
And actually on that level, tech doesn't matter much because understanding business and understanding how this kind of tech and business actually talk to each other on a high level, this is sufficient for them to function because their role is not to give to a given product team exhaustive guidance. It's more rather to say, okay, so what are our standard patterns? So how do we do it? So do we which vendors do we choose or which product do we choose to adopt? And the latter is also quite interesting because these days you can get a product or an app for almost everything. The challenge of that position is that these products from vendors, they are made for a general market. And unfortunately, whatever is made for the general market doesn't fit a particular organization. So in fact, on a very high level, you face the situation that you don't have a vendor at all who can give you what you ideally think. You need to figure out how to survive with what is there on the market, or go and develop.
So
develop
that
yourself.
makes sense. In that sense, it makes sense to. In that case, it makes sense to stitch together more solutions from the market and also internally developed solutions. But what do you think about? What's your take? Because I have seen this role also in enterprise organizations, where solution architect has ownership on the domain overall, so they have better understanding. I agree with you. Also, what do you think about things like compliance and things like that? I know there's like compliance officers and so forth, but these are generally, they lack the technical knowledge. So what would you, didn't that make sense? That makes sense. Sorry, in that sense, would it still make sense to have a solution architect trying to cross-pollinate and orchestrate everything, or does it still not have a place?
Well, this is where I need to get back and ask. Okay, let's define a problem, and each problem definition would be specific to a particular organization and to the particular context. And actually, the good definition of problem also brings in the definition of a resolution.
Definitely.
So what is it that we have? If you would say that because look, this is where the trade-offs begin coming. You say, okay, we have compliance officer who is not technical and he is let's say making a lot of fuss as they typically do. But what can be done about here? Let's begin with the basics. It can be solved with onboarding, and onboarding is, I think, after communication is a thing that you can say needs to be improved in any organization.
Definitely.
All right. So in that case, onboarding is a part of let's say. Hiring managers' direct responsibilities. You don't need an architect for that. You need to have a new developer being pointed to the pile of documentation that compliance officer has produced. Next problem: did compliance officer produce this documentation? Okay, if we don't, then we need to have somebody who would write that documentation. Maybe we can come up with. Let's say libraries that need to be embedded. So you would have kind of very good developer to write that stuff. You see, we have one solution, second solution. So we didn't do anything about architecture. Now the architect may come in place if you have let's say, quite diverse requirements.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you have the environment where you work cross-cloud with multiple vendors, and all of them have a few other things. And okay, so in this case, it's better to have, let's say, few people who actually understand how it all hangs together, because any change in the chain may actually introduce vulnerabilities that either should not be done in the first place, or which should be compensated in the next system and chain. But of course, if you're a developer in a system A, you will not know all the intricacies of a system B. In that case, it makes sense to have the let's say the architect who looks after the, let's say, the compliance implementation. And in this scenario, with this kind of problem statement, it begins making sense.
Yeah.
At the same time, you can solve it by let's say embracing Spotify model. You will put together, for example, a compliance chapter in your developers and put it there.
Yeah, that's also a possibility.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, definitely. So, like, and I agree with you. It also happens now that the role is, I think you said muddy or a little bit mixed. So, I guess for the people who are curious about the role, it's the role of an architect is sometimes a person who does X, Y, and Z alongside traditional architecture. So it's not just about architecture; it's about all these different things, and it leads to having the solution architect role being described differently from one organization, one client to another.
Correct.
Now, if we roll it back and let's say we focus a little bit more on developers, right? So who are, want to take this step in their career to slide into that role. We talked about, decision making. We talked about, putting tech aside for a second and looking at the product. Any other things that you learned from experience that maybe can, speed up this transition?
Before doing this transition, I would say,
or even to know if the person, maybe they heard about the architect role, right? And then, sorry to interrupt you, and maybe they're interested in it, but they don't know for sure if it's something for them. That's another question.
Well, I would say that if you're crazy enough to start making important decisions for your clients, where you will not hesitate that you are accountable, probably you are already ready. But this is my only interpretation. If you are not there yet in your brain, probably it will be a very rough ride for you. But then I would say not everybody should be architect. Not everybody is mental enough to be architect.
And everybody is mental enough to be an architect.
Yes, okay. Mental enough to be architect.
Yeah.
And there's
mental, you mean crazy?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And there's nothing wrong that
in a good way.
Yeah, in a good way. that you will watch this video 5 years from now and say, "Damn, now I am. Now I have become crazy enough to do it."
Yeah.
There is, although, one important thing that is important for this transition. The thing is, the role of developer is more or less straightforward. Because it revolves around production of code. The role of architect, along with the money, well, technically speaking, you being paid a bit more, also brings a lot of sometimes justified, but more frequently unjustified expectations of what architect can solve. So in order to be able to survive in this role, you also need to know what all other professions are actually supposed to be doing. Because you see, because the role is very vague, it's not specific. Unless you know what all other professions are doing, you may be in fact doing entry-level jobs after becoming the architect. Effectively, jeopardizing and derailing your developer career. Do you want an example?
Yeah, please.
I was hired approximately 1.5 years ago in one of the fintech startups to
startups. Okay.
well, scale-ups, I would say.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. To be the architect on on a fintech delivery. It kind of on the paper looked fantastic. But then when I landed and started getting into the basics and into the details of it, they told me, okay, look, in our project, we receive a ticket in a Jira from a customer with bug description, and let's say architect is supposed to take a look at it. I look at that and say, guys, are you serious? Because you have a dedicated QA people in your staff. And said, yes, we are serious, this is how we have been running. Now, if you have nothing, if you don't have any experience how QA was done 15 years ago, doing exactly this is something that company would hire people off the street for. It's like entry-level QA position. So why would you want to hire somebody who has spent 25 years in the company and just worked with Silicon Valley, let's say, vendors to do literally entry-level job?
Yeah,
but
it's a waste of.
It's a waste.
Yeah.
First of all, it's a waste of you as a developer. It's a waste of your career. I'm not saying that if you have become an architect, you will automatically reject doing the work. I'm not saying this.
No.
Sometimes you have to roll up your sleeves and do the needful. But the thing is, if you don't know how, for example, what DevOps is supposed to be doing, what QA is supposed to be doing, what BA is supposed to be doing, you will end up doing, let's say, you will be asked to plug in the biggest pain at the moment by the client. And it's okay if you know what is going on, but it's kind of very dangerous if you have no clue. Now, if I would stay in that scale up, let's say for 5 years, and would only do this ticket, and kind of eventually I would come to the transition, and I would sit across the guy with my capabilities, and we said, okay, Alex, well, please explain what you have been doing the last 5 years. And I would say, I was just, reviewing tickets for developers. He would show me to the door. I said, dude, go away. You don't have experience that is in your CV. Congratulations, your career is ruined. That's why it is quite important either to have a very good mentor who can actually educate you how things are done, or you have very extensive your personal experience where you have seen different corners of the business. Because this is something that will help you to understand, are you asked to do actually the architecture, or are you asked to put the band-aid on the customer where the customer feels like, okay, I'm bleeding and this guy is expensive and therefore he'll do it.
Yeah, just make them feel better about themselves. And and it also, because roles also change from organization to organization. So like the engineering manager, for example, and this one is not doing the same as the other one. So it's also knowing in general what these roles are doing, but also, having the conversations within your client and, understanding what everyone does helps, And you mentioned, like, it's not about rolling your sleeves and doing the dirty work, but if it becomes a consistent thing that you do all the time, then it becomes a problem, right? Yeah. And it's cool. That's a fantastic. I'm really interesting points that we brought up today, especially with the interaction between Agile, the architect role. I know that we're gonna dig deeper into this topic in another occasion, in a different format. So I don't want to say which format yet, but it might or might not revolve around having a bigger group of people. I know that you've been, really successful with giving the negotiation workshops within SciTech. So
thank you
congratulations for that. And I know I got a request this morning from one of my chapter leads, seriously, to have one. And I think you agreed to it, so thank you. Can you tell us maybe, just without too much details, what's going to happen in that, just for people who are interested, what's going to happen in that workshop?
Actually, we have so far created 4 workshops that teach the basics of negotiations. And essentially, we go over how to behave in difficult conversations, what kind of tactics actually do exist. And essentially, we teach our chappies, I have been teaching our chappies to learn how to overcome negations from a client.
How to go past the no.
Yes.
Yes.
And of course, there is no magic. So we will not make you a kind of a crazy successful salesman that everybody says yes to. That's not the intention. The intention is to explain what can be done, so that next time you face yourself in a situation that you want to persuade somebody, or kind of you are being pressed to the wall to commit to something that you don't feel comfortable. You have at least several options that will pop up in your brain.
Definitely.
Said, okay, let me try to see this one and see how it goes.
Wow.
That's what it is. And of course, it doesn't end there. So negotiations is one part. And for this year, we will, together with my chapter, we'll be looking into the matters of personal efficiency. Personal efficiency.
Efficiency, yeah.
So what does it mean for you to be efficient? That's another very interesting subject.
Wow. Yeah, definitely. And I know, so negotiation is really important. Like we discussed in this dialogue today, having a conversation most of the time includes negotiation at some level.
Yeah, indeed.
What about, because I know you want to dig deeper into this topic of architecture and so forth. So I guess you may or may not be given a meetup soon about this topic. So can you give us a quick sneak preview about what's going to happen in that meetup? Yeah.
Well, actually, I think the best growth possibilities that we can give to our chappies is to educate them how other professions in the IT actually look like. And if you come back to the definition of architecture that we have been talking about, it's some of decisions which are hard to change. So a successful architect, in a nutshell, simply knows what hard things are for all people. So why don't we just meet and tell to each other what is hard for us? And the knowledge and experience is a thing that only multiplies when you share it, and that's what we're gonna do.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, that will be a pleasure.
We will, as soon as it's finalized, we'll be sharing more details about it.
Absolutely.
Aleks, thanks again for talking to me today.
Yeah.
Very, pleasure all mine, to discuss this with you. And I guess that's it for today.
Yeah.
Talk
okay,
soon.
guys.
See you.
See ya.